Hello and welcome to the Verbal Commitment Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Kevin Flaherty, and I'm here as always with my good friend Ryan Wallace. We're talking about the world of local recruiting, from Kansas and Kansas City prospects to the college classes at Kansas, Kansas State, and Missouri. We have a special guest today with the window to enter the transfer portal closing in transfer portal guru Chris Hummer of CBS Sports. Chris is terrific both in what he does in the portal and as a college football expert for CBS and 24/7 Sports, so you won't want to miss that. As a quick aside, remember that while the 14-day window to enter is closed, Indiana and Miami players still have a few days to enter after the national championship game. That 5-day window opened on Tuesday, closes on Saturday, and then the window will be shut. If you like what you're hearing, like this video, leave us a comment below, and subscribe to follow along here on YouTube. We just started a new channel here on YouTube, KCSN Varsity. We have some pretty big plans for it, so click that subscribe button so you can keep up with the show and any changes. If we decide to do a live show, you'll be notified when that happens, so go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on an audio platform, you can leave us a review, a 5-star rating, wherever you get your podcasts, like Apple or Spotify. We have our own specific audio channel through KCSN on Apple and Spotify, so you can seek us out there. Word of mouth always helps too, so tell your friends about us. As always, we appreciate you guys helping us to grow and getting us in front of more people like you. Ryan, it's time to hit the alarm.
Let's do it.
For those of you new to the show, an alarm means that one of Kansas, Kansas State, or Missouri landed a commitment. And we get the dual interest here of Missouri not just landing 2 commitments, but a pair of pledges from local products, and Lee's Summit athlete Karsten Feeney and Liberty North cornerback Trishundon Neal. Ryan, we've talked a ton about both of these guys on previous shows, but for those who might just be catching up, let's go ahead and start with Trishundon Neal, somebody that we said in our rankings episode had as much upside as anybody in this 2026 KC Mo class.
Yeah, you and I, when we went back to that episode not that long ago, it was like at the end of December when we did our KCSN consensus for Kansas City Mo's top 10 in the 2026 class. You and I both had Trishundon as our number 7 player. It ended up where in our KCSN consensus, he ends up going to number 8. But still, at the end of the day, I mean, a player that you and I believe to be a top 10 player in Kansas City, Missouri for the 2026 class. Just incredibly long, really gifted player in terms of the ball skills. And we have shown, countless times on this show of him returning punts. You can go back to, some of his earlier film, like his junior and sophomore tape, and see him as a receiver. As a senior, you and I got to see him play a little bit more safety, where he was able to come downhill. But at the end of the day, I mean, his strength will always be just flat out coverage. This is a guy that can lock down a lot of space. And again, naturally long, really gifted, fluid in the hips and everything that you would want. So I think, again, once he gets acclimated to kind of the SEC level of just everything on and off the field, it's going to be a whirlwind probably to come, coming at him like a tidal wave. But I think once he does that, once they get him on, proper kind of nutrition program, because obviously the body hasn't really filled out since we saw him as a sophomore at Liberty North. Once those two things come together, and again, I feel like with his competitive, mentality, he's going to want to do those things quick. So I think once that comes together, say in a redshirt year, maybe 2 years down the road, it's a kid that could absolutely be a factor on a successful Missouri Tigers team in the SEC, at the SEC level.
And how about Karsten Feeney? I know we had Karsten on as one of our Tacos for Life players of the week, and the toughness, the versatility, the athleticism he showed, it was really a big part of Lee's Summit surviving a lot of injuries early on, but then bringing home a state title that a ton of people would have called improbable, if not impossible, with where they were at certain points this season.
Well, again, a good, late eval by the Missouri Tigers for, kind of looking around at who's still kind of available or who do we feel like we can get in state, because again, Karsten Feeney wasn't available. He was a Northwest Missouri State commit that ends up flipping to the Tigers. But again, I think the season that he had spoke volumes. It kind of speaks for itself. And he might not be the only Lee Summit Tiger that ends up heading to Missouri. We'll see what happens. There could be another alarm to come, but I think with Karsten, what's interesting for you and I to track as he gets to Columbia is where he ends up falling positionally. And again, he was a guy that we talked about in our rankings was kind of just outside our top 10, kind of knocking on that door. And I think what held us back was, we like him as a receiver, maybe didn't love him as a receiver, liked him as a defensive back, maybe didn't love him there just because we hadn't seen enough of him. I will say, what we did see of him late in the year on the defensive side of the ball as a senior, I think that's what really pushed you and I to go, maybe this kid is a top 10 player. I think you saw his ferocity coming downhill, laying the wood on some kids. I know I mentioned it in the Jackson game. I think he put the fear of God into a couple of their offensive players, and I think kind of took them out of the game a little bit with some early hits. So if he ends up on the defensive side of the ball, wouldn't surprise me. And I think that might be the area where he can really start to be a factor at a place like Missouri. Because again, I think it's natural as a Tiger fan to go, we're stealing commits from Northwest Missouri State. I think when you start to put on the tape and you start to see what Karsten Feeney can be, that's why Missouri said, no, this is a guy that I think is worth us taking a gamble on.
Sticking on the local high school front, Chris McCartney stepped down as Olathe North head coach. This is a program that's enjoyed a ton of success over the last 30 or so years. And while we've had some pretty big job openings in the Metro in the last year, this has to rank near the top, especially on the Kansas side.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, you're talking about, I off the top of my head, I can't think if there's ever been another school that's produced as many Simone Award winners as Olathe North. And I think that it reached a point with Olathe North where I think Coach McCartney is probably a little worn out. I mean, he's been doing this at a high level for a long time. A great guy that you and I both interacted with kind of in post games and stuff. A number of different times when I was out doing gamers for Preps KC. I mean, just a great guy to interact with. Tough nosed guy, hard nosed, kind of from the old cloth, but I mean, a guy that always seemed to get the most out of the Olathe North Eagles. But again, I think probably when you talk about their history, probably time where there was some buzz going around Olathe North of like, we want to get back to where we were. And they've knocked on the door under Chris McCartney recently, but like wanting to get back. And let's be honest, Kevin, when you and I have started to go dive into 2027s and 28s and maybe even some 29s, Olathe North has the roster kind of on the come up to make a surge in 2026 this coming fall and 2027 the year after with some young guys. So this is a highly appealing job. I would have to imagine they've got some guys from the Olathe North tree, so to speak, that would make sense for them to just kind of promote from within. But it also would not shock either one of us if there's some phone calls being made to the AD over there, Mr. Price, trying to say, can I get my name in the mix here as a candidate? This is a big time opening on the Kansas side, no doubt about it.
Each week, we've tried to give you a little bit of an updated look at each of the local Power Fours transfer classes. Let's go ahead and start real quick with Kansas State, with the Wildcats gearing up for Colin Klein's first season in charge. Ryan, what sticks out to you about this class right now?
Well, I think, the thing that I mentioned even last week, and again, I'll highlight today, is the fact that K-State and Colin Klein seemed to make it a point that, hey, we're rebuilding this entire roster. And so we're going to need some instant impact guys right away. And that's where you're going to see a Wendell Gregory come into play, right? But even Wendell Gregory, as I mentioned him as an instant impact guy, is also a guy that carries multiple years of eligibility. And I think that, to me, is where you saw Colin Klein and K-State do something that's been maybe a little different than what you would see year to year. I don't think they'll make this the case every year. Maybe I'm wrong. But I do feel like they went out and found guys that, hey, this is a player that we feel like we can coach up right away and maybe get something out of this coming fall, but also a kid that we feel like we can get something out of beyond the season. Elijah Hill being one of them. He was the one that I'm highlighting on this graphic as being one of my most underrated guys. I think Tanner Morley is another player, offensive lineman from Colorado State, that I think is really underrated. But Elijah Hill is a kid from Kennesaw State that they went out, found, played as a true freshman this year and had some tremendous spark plays, and a guy that they said, we can bring you in, have you kind of learn under a Wendell Gregory. You might see the field quite a bit this year. If you don't, that's okay. We're going to get the most, out of you down the road. So I love specifically Elijah Hill, Wendell Gregory, the pass rush potential that they're getting from the defensive line. That was huge for me. Kevin, the thing that I'm on the fence about, though, is the protection up front on the offensive side, sticking in the trenches, the offensive line. Again, I mentioned a guy like Tanner Morley that I really like, but several other players in this class that I feel like can immediately come in and compete, can have the potential to start, but also some guys that you're not bona fide. You're not like like when they brought in Fitzgerald last year from Ohio State, that you were thinking, I think George Fitzpatrick, excuse me, I said Fitzgerald. Hey, this is a guy that can come in right away. You are immediately our left tackle. I don't get that vibe from a lot of these guys, that there are an immediate, no doubt, plug and play here, plug and play there. I think you can get a starting five out of some of the guys that they got. But I'm not counting out some of the guys that they were able to retain, some of even the young guys coming in and making a push to the offensive line. And with Coach Mike Schmidt, a new coach up front, who knows what's going to happen with the offensive line. That's kind of where I'm TBD when it comes to K-State.
Moving on to Kansas, the Jayhawks made a few headlines this past week by landing former Wildcat Dylan Edwards, who is now the Jayhawks' top-ranked player. Ryan, just your general thoughts on that take as a whole.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts on the whole class, but when it comes to Dylan Edwards, who is the top-ranked player on KU's offense by the industry, both sides, On3 and 24/7 Sports, I will just say I really do hope Dylan the best because, again, you and I have talked about it on the show. We got to meet Dylan coming out of his freshman year at Derby, and I don't think there's any secret that the player, really the person that we got to know then, and the person that we've seen kind of in, whether it be interviews or stories that you hear, it's not really the same person. And I think from a standpoint of just maybe happiness, like the passion for the game, if he can get that back, man, I think that would be huge for just Dylan as a person, as a human being, huge for Kansas. So as I toss it back to you to kind of go over the entire class, all I will say is that I think this is a high risk play for the Jayhawks, but potentially a very high reward play for the Jayhawks, because when Dylan Edwards is healthy and when he's engaged, his body work speaks for itself.
Yeah, this is an interesting Kansas class, Ryan, and the Kansas had a lot of holes to fill just from a sheer numbers standpoint, and did so a year after having to get so many guys because you had such a huge graduating senior class. And so when you start to look at the top-ranked players here, we mentioned Dylan Edwards, Trevon McAlpine, I'll mention here in just a minute, talking about him. I really think Jalen Butler is a fascinating, underrated player in this group, because when you look at what Kansas has in that tight end room, they went out, they actually got 2 tight end transfers. You look at Leighton Cure coming back, Carson Brune returning, adding the high school guys to that room. The one guy that they didn't really have was just a really sort of big-time athlete at that tight end position. And last year, with the injuries that KU had to the receiving core early on, where Canty wasn't ready to go, you wound up having Cam Pickett being hurt some early on. We really saw Deshaun Hanukkah step up before he got hurt, and the way that they used him, not just throwing him the ball quite a bit, but throwing it down the field and really utilizing that. You look at Andy Kotelnicki's offense, and I think that having a guy who can stretch the field like Jalen Butler, Old Dominion didn't throw him the ball that much, 9 catches a year ago, but man, Ryan, when you watch the tape, this is a guy that can really go. And so to me, he's a fun sleeper pick in that offensive group, and that he's somebody you can throw the ball to down the seam, and I think see a lot more production from. What we love about this group, filling defensive needs. Kansas struggled defensively a year ago. It's not a huge secret. I think they're about 75th in defensive SP+. If Kansas can get, say, a top 50-ish defense, I'm not even saying have a great defense, just take a step forward, it could mean a lot toward this team going to a bowl game this year. And I think when you look at what you were returning with Leroy Harris, Dak Brinkley on the other side, adding a guy like Trevon McAlpine to fill out that defensive tackle group, and other guys in that group around Blake Harrell, going out and getting so many linebackers, including Bam Crouch, next to Trey Lathan, and getting Trey Lathan back was a big deal. You added depth to the cornerback room. You go out and get, Corey Butler Jr. and a safety that they really needed to upgrade at that safety spot. You have Corey Gordon Jr., excuse me. When you look at Kevin Otis, you get a defensive tackle who's a young guy that can do a lot of different things and potentially be a star down the line when Blake Harrell goes. They have a legitimate, I think, defensive two deep. And so not only did they grab some plug-and-play starters where they needed them, the depth is a lot better. The big need that we had there, Ryan, is proven offensive weapons. And what I mean by that is you mentioned Dylan Edwards, right?
Right.
Dylan is a guy that has a lot of potential, hasn't put it all together for a season yet in the way that KU is going to want him to. You've got a couple running backs, who are 500, 600-yard backs that you added to the room, a couple receivers who are moving up in level of competition. And so when you look at a new quarterback in that room, whether it's, them adding Chase Jenkins from Rice, whether it's one of the two guys returning, a new quarterback's going to need to go somewhere with the football. And right now, Kansas just does not have guys that you absolutely know this guy is a playmaker at the Big 12 level right now. And so that's the area that, for me, I'm a little bit on the fence about.
It strikes me kind of in the same way that I was talking about K-State's offensive line. It feels like, from what I'm hearing, if I'm interpreting you right, it's like KU has some guys and some players that can make plays, but and it could be competitive, but maybe just lacking that Emmanuel Henderson from a year ago that was like, that's our no doubter.
Yeah, 100%. And Dylan Edwards could be that guy in the running back room. When you look at the receivers, they got a couple good receivers, but what are we going to see from that group, at Kansas? I think that's the interesting question there. Right. Let's go ahead and finish up real quick with where we started, Missouri. Missouri is looking to continue its recent run of success in the portal. Huge get. And Chris Hummer brought it up, getting Austin Simmons to play quarterback out of Ole Miss.
Yeah, he's their top-ranked player by the industry when it comes to offense. Another player that Chris Hummer mentions in our interview that you'll see here later about Robert Woodyard Jr., top-ranked player on defense from Auburn. And then a guy that I know you're excited about from an underrated standpoint, yet another SEC transfer that comes over, a guy that I think could play kind of interior or out at tackle from Mississippi State when you talk about Zach Owens. Overall, though, Kevin, I know the thing that you and I have discussed when we talk about the Missouri Tigers is that secondary. That is absolutely what we loved when you talk about, Graves coming over from Ole Miss, a guy, Chris Graves was playing in the college football playoff matter of weeks ago. Elijah Dotson, safety from Michigan. Jaden Blair is a 6'4", kind of safety. I don't know where the hell they're going to put him, but I can't wait to see wherever they put him. Transfer from Notre Dame, young kid. And obviously you've got several other players in the secondary from like the Florence kid from Oregon. I mean, they really not only kind of rebuilt the secondary, Kevin, but really strengthened it with players that I think can immediately come in and go toe to toe with anybody in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree. And when you're playing at that level, it's about having frontline guys like Graves, obviously, but it's also about the depth. And I think Missouri, Chris Hummer's going to talk a little bit about their injury luck a little bit later in the show, or their poor injury luck. I don't want to say they're injury proof, Ryan, but I do think that they filled out that secondary to where they can maybe have something go wrong. They can have a player step in and maybe be okay there. On the fence, reloaded receivers. Obviously, you bring back Donovan Olugbude. Kid's got star potential.
Yes.
But building out that room around him, Ryan, I think it's not that they don't have talented guys. It's, again, you look at Horatio Fields from Auburn being a guy that could wind up being a big-time guy. But if you're Missouri, you would have liked to have another year of Kevin Coleman, another year of Josh Manning, some of the guys that they had in that room that we've seen sort of develop. Instead, you're kind of starting over at some spots around a Luke Bidet.
You nailed it. I mean, it's not that they didn't go get some guys with some big time potential, but you don't have those guys that it feels like maybe are proven. That in the past they've been able to go out and get, like a Coleman, or even if you were to retain a Josh Manning who, maybe didn't light it up statistically, but a guy that's been out there for several years that seemed to come into his own this last year. They go out and they pull over Nashawn Montgomery from Florida. But, again, statistics wise, like, didn't really blow you off the page, right? Same with Horatio Fields. I mean, guys that have played a little bit in the SEC, but weren't their number 1, 2, maybe even number 3 players on their former teams. Caleb Goody is probably the one guy that maybe you feel the best about in terms of what his production has been prior.
You lit up KU for Cincinnati. Yeah. He'll get a chance to play against KU again in the Border Wars.
I mean, prior to Missouri, he's probably the one guy that comes in. I mean, I was looking at old film of like Kenrick Lanier earlier today. Again, a guy that was like an All-American out of high school, goes to Minnesota. You watch him on tape and the stuff he's doing, and you're like, man, who knows what Missouri can get out of him? But then you also think, well, why didn't Minnesota get anything out of him? Sure. So, yeah, again, big potential there. But as kind of has been a common thread for the things that we're on the fence about with all 3 of these local teams, maybe not that 1 or 2 proven guys, given what you saw exit the transfer portal at the same position.
A quick reminder that you can follow along with us on Twitter/X at verbalcommit_KC for clips from the show, conversations about local players, and even the odd highlight. We'll be right back with this week's guest, transfer portal and college football expert Chris Hummer of CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports, right after this.
I'm Brett Goodwin, one of the owners of The Learning Tree. The Learning Tree is a neighborhood toy store in Prairie Village, Kansas. This has been here in this location since 2000s, and my husband Alan and I purchased the store in 2023. Alan and I grew up in families where we've always wanted to have a business together. Alan grew up, for instance, his parents had a jewelry store. I worked in a local toy store here in Prairie Village when I was growing up. When this opportunity happened in 2023, we knew right away we wanted to contact them and pursue the store. We wouldn't have been able to get the store without the team at Emprise Bank. From the day we contacted them, they knew what we needed to do, which was very helpful. I would absolutely recommend the team at Emprise Bank to anyone looking to secure a business. We worked with Emprise from day one. They were extremely helpful. They were always great resources. We talk to them frequently. They know the area. They're very friendly. We know who we're going to talk with, and they know what we need to do. We hope we'll see you at the Learning Tree.
Welcome back to the Verbal Commitment Podcast here on KCSN. We're joined once more by Chris Hummer, national college football writer and transfer portal expert with 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it. Expert's probably a jump too far, but
I was going to say, hey,
I know something.
Real quick, Kevin, before you get started, I was going to ask you, since you are kind of, you have that title now, is that something that maybe you regret in hindsight of like, yeah, I'll sign me up for the portal activity?
I mean, I definitely regret it in the moment occasionally, but I won't lie. It's been an unexpected boon for my career and kind of has turned into the thing. I mean, we all know how this works in sports now. Transactions win the day, and college football has more transactions than any other sport. So at least it's interesting. I'll say that.
Yeah, I was going to ask, part of finding your sort of niche in college sports or college football in particular, for lack of a better way to put it, is, getting in where you fit in. And we've seen Heather Dinich was kind of on the ground floor when ESPN started covering, every little detail of the college football playoff selection process. How did you find yourself in the middle of sort of all of this growing tornado of the transfer portal? And how has your job changed, since you took on those roles?
I honestly don't think I could tell you. I think somebody just needed to do it. And my editor was like, hey, this is interesting. Go do it. And it's evolved from kind of like a curiosity in college football to almost the defining roster building strategy. Obviously, high school is still first and foremost for programs, and you have to build out of high school, have a successful chance at a roster. But I mean, Indiana just won a national championship, and I would say they only probably recruited out of high school, I would guess, like 30 or 40% of that roster, based on the way they turned it over. So it changed the sport. It defines every December and January in college football. And I've been very fortunate to cover it that way, and don't always feel that in the moment, but it's definitely never boring. I'll say that.
First off season, obviously, that we won't have a spring window. It's just down to one, which is now closed for majority of everybody, I think. Kind of looking back now, any key differences or changes this year, or maybe unexpected things that happen with there only being one window, or did it kind of go as you would have expected it to go, knowing that coaches only have this one opportunity?
It went as expected, and it was as hectic as I expected. But I think what the NCAA essentially created was like a month and a half long legal tampering period. I think the idea was for them to push it back, kind of take some of the burden off coaches and allow schools to have essentially a month in December to negotiate with their players in good faith. And then they can make their decision, go in the portal and take their visits. What happened in reality is like schools were tampering with other players in mid-October, and deals were being struck with players in late November. And December was this time where like you had so much time, you had so much space before guys could go on a visit. What happened was like the offers got crazier and crazier. Like schools started outbidding each other. Schools started fighting for players that were supposed to go somewhere else. Like it was harder to maintain a roster. The agreement you made with a player on December 1st, like doesn't necessarily look the same on December 14th because their market changed. And I think it was just a situation where like the idea of a January window made sense on paper to slow things down, when in reality it just sped it up. And it also really put the onus on schools to make deals as quickly as possible, but you couldn't actually sign those deals. So it created a really weird spot. But I would say the movement, the dominoes and everything else, like that was expected, but the kind of result of all this was just more tampering than ever.
Chris, when rev share was announced, it was kind of sold a little bit as the way for the little guy to compete, that it's going to stop all these wild NIL deals. All of a sudden they have to go through a clearinghouse. But here we are, January 21st, and you're still hearing this program has a $30 million roster. This program promised to Lane Kiffin he was going to get a $35 million or whatever. Where is this money coming from it, and how is that working within, I guess, if it is working within the legal guidelines of what college football is now supposed to be?
Yeah, I would say that's a pretty big if there. I mean, two things. One, I think Indiana just won a national championship with what I think is less than a $20 million roster. So it is still possible, but next year Indiana will be significantly above that. As for where the money's coming from, there's two answers. One is legally. You have partners stepping up. Like some of these high-priced quarterbacks you're talking about, Brandon Sorsby, for example. I believe Texas Tech's an Adidas school. I've been told Adidas is helping out with a significant portion of that contract. You also have carve-outs from donors and collective members where you can strike smaller legal deals that the CSC will approve, and you can kind of stack them together to get to bigger numbers. You'll see schools do that. But schools have also gotten very creative in terms of how they're going to approach these numbers and how they'll get there. I don't know if it's all totally legal. There's been everything from like shaving down agent commissions essentially. And instead of paying that out of the rev share, you pay it out of the collective money on the back end. So like, if you think about it, if every player on your roster at a $20 million roster you're taking 5% of that total off of a $20 million roster, you're saving about $1 million. And that's a way schools can create more money. But like, the reality is like, that's probably still not enough. And you hear a lot of likely illegal ways this is being done too, but it's just going to be on whether the CSC can enforce it.
Forgive me, Chris, if what I'm about to ask you, some of the things you might have just touched on as an answer to my question and how you were just responding to Kevin. But I read, I think earlier this month, where you mentioned kind of a roster, 24/7 Sports mentioned in an article that kind of a roster of 25 million plus is kind of what's needed to be truly competitive in the championship push. So, and again, maybe it's some of the things you just described, but what can programs like a Kansas State, do to try and compensate for some of those disadvantages? It feels like those are kind of the questions that Kevin and I get asked all the time. We're not nearly as ingrained into what's going on behind the scenes as someone like you is.
I don't think it's any different than what Bill Snyder did. Like back when he made Kansas State good, you have to go a slightly different direction and you have to evaluate better than everybody else. Evaluations are obviously difficult in this era because if you hit a home run on an evaluation, you have to pay to keep them. I mean, Kansas State lost several of their best players this offseason to the portal, including 2 to Indiana defensively. So I don't know if there is like a great answer to that question. You just have to have a strong enough culture as a locker room to keep as many people around as possible. You have to do your best to evaluate. You have to find undervalued resources. Like college football's always had a little bit of a Moneyball element to it in terms of how you can find success as a smaller program. And you really have to find values in the portal. You have to find values out of high school. You have to figure out where you can find value, which is hard to do in this era. I don't think there's a clear answer for that, but I do know if your roster is $15 million and you're competing against a $25 million roster, you still have a chance to be more competitive than you were a decade ago when 4 or 5 teams held all the talent on their roster. Like all 85 spots were 4 or 5 stars. So I still think the Kansases and the Kansas States of the world are in better shape in some ways than they were before. It's just going to be an annual question. How do you deal with Goliath, Texas Tech, and the Big 12 just because of the way they spend?
I'm glad you mentioned that because that was actually going to be my next question is I thought Texas Tech was well coached as well this year. I didn't think it was all, hey, they just threw money at it. And they did have a decent number of returning guys as well to what they added from the portal. But at the same time, when you saw Texas Tech in the Big 12, it was just so obvious that it was a different caliber of roster than what the rest of the Big 12 had, especially when you look at that pass rush and how much they were able to invest into that defensively. What can a Big 12 program do to kind of up its game? And is there somebody that you're eyeing that you say, hey, it's not Texas Tech's conference yet. This is somebody that, whether it's BYU or whoever, that potentially could spend, if not on par with Texas Tech, potentially put themselves into range to be a legitimate foil for Texas Tech?
Well, first, I'd like to say a caveat. This is easy for me to say as somebody who doesn't have to pay any money or recruit rich people to give money. But I think Texas Tech's an example of a school that had a vision and executed that vision and squeezed their donor base for a vision that came to fruition. And not every school has a Cody Campbell. Like, that's the reality, but you have to sell yourself to your boosters and your donors that, like, this is what's possible when you hit on football. I mean, Indiana just did it. Indiana's a national champion. Indiana was the worst team in college football historically up until 2 years ago. Like, it's possible in this era. And I mean, I hate to say it, but it comes down to alignment as a university and alignment in your vision. And you have to have a coach and a front office that's willing to do the work on the back end to get people engaged and to get donors to come to the table. And then you also have to do the right thing with the money once you get there.
Sure.
That's a long answer for what you're asking. But I mean, BYU is obviously very invested in football. We saw that with them keeping Kalani Sitake over Penn State. And he was basically a done deal with Penn State until they came to the table with a significant contract raise and extra money for the program in terms of revenue sharing. I know Oklahoma State, if you look at their portal class, it's top 10 nationally. They've done an unbelievable job in the portal, both retaining their players, and I say retaining their players coming over from UNT, but also finding deals in the portal as well. And they're trying to re-energize that booster base that had largely been turned off in the late Mike Gundy years. TCU is more competitive than it's been from a dollar standpoint recently, but you have to get the right guy and you have to have the right vision and you have to have engaged boosters to really make a run at it. Because we saw with what Texas Tech did this year, it is possible if you get everybody in alignment and spend on the right things, but you got to get some rich people to step up to the plate.
You hit on two, I wanted to stick kind of with the Big 12 flavor, and you hit on 2 programs that I was going to ask you about separately, but I'm going to try and combine them into one question here. Oklahoma State right now, the number 1 class among the Big 12 on 24/7 Sports, number 6 currently overall with 54 newcomers. part A of the question is, how quickly do you feel like this particular group can like turn the situation around in Stillwater on the field? And the other question that I had was about TCU. Here's a program that's gone from being top 3 in the Big 12 in transfer rankings for like the 23 and 24, I think. And now 2025 and 2026, they've been in the bottom 3 to 5 of the Big 12, very minimal transfer addition. So what's going on in Fort Worth kind of behind the scenes that's led to them not being maybe as active?
I guess let's start with TCU first. I think philosophically there's been a shift for Sonny Dykes. And it's funny, if you go back to like 2018, like Sonny Dykes was one of the first real adopters of the portal with what he did at SMU. He helped transform SMU from bottom feeder to contender. And what conference were they in at the time? It was the American, I suppose. Yeah. Sorry, like it's been so many conferences.
Conference alignment happens. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, and then early on at TCU, obviously, like the transfer portal played a big role in them going to a national championship game. But I think they've had an opportunity, I think 4 classes now, to kind of create the infrastructure they wanted from a high school perspective in their program. And TCU doesn't lose a lot of contributors. I know they lost Josh Hoover in the portal, but I think they bring back, of the guys that didn't graduate, I actually talked to somebody about this today. I think they only lost like 4 guys that played over 150 snaps to the portal. So they did a really nice job with retention. And for TCU, in an era where you still save a little bit of money in retention, it makes sense for them to go that route. And we'll see if it works for Sonny Dykes and his staff. But they're very bullish on their high school classes and doing it a different way. And I think for most schools, it's still the preference. You build it from within and add pieces on top to fill in the gaps. Oklahoma State, I think, can be successful right away. I think there's no barrier to entry in the Big 12, really. I think there's a couple programs that are very, very good, but you can change your fortunes very, very quickly. They have an NFL talent quarterback. They have multiple NFL receivers, potentially. If you kind of look at what they added, they had 4 4-star portal receivers this cycle, maybe 3. But it wasn't just Wyatt. Why am I blanking on Wyatt's last name? The kid from Katy.
Right.
And then they brought in Caleb Hawkins. They brought in some really nice defensive pieces. I think Skylar Cassidy, the defensive coordinator, is as good as it gets in terms of the coordinators under 40 in the country. He's really young. I think he's like 32 or 33. And I think Eric Morris's offense is always going to put up points, and they can be very competitive next year thanks to the portal class they've had.
You mentioned
Wyatt Young.
I'm sorry for Wyatt Young.
You got it.
You mentioned the Moneyball aspect to a lot of this. And I think for those who aren't, shopping in the premium aisle, they kind of need to find some workarounds. And one of the things, KU has usually come from Power 4 starters who were like hurt at their previous stop, or there was a coaching change, top recruits who didn't make it for whatever reason at their previous school. And so maybe there's some potential there to work with. And then obviously the group of 5 and lower level come up. Is there an area like among that trio, or maybe even outside of it, where you're seeing maybe some more bang for your buck? Like, if you were in charge of a Kansas or Kansas State, is there an area in there specifically where you're like, hey, this is an area where maybe we can make a living a little bit?
I mean, value is difficult everywhere. Obviously, only Texas Tech is shopping at Nordstrom. Everybody else is shopping at Nordstrom Rack, but you got to fighting over the same like button down at Nordstrom Rack. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it can get expensive. I think you can find value in all of those areas. I think teams that can identify FCS talent against lesser competition are going to save more money in the long term. But I think that it's really hard to find secrets anymore. Like the tracking data is so good. Everybody has access to things like coaches by the numbers, which gives you height, weight, speed, testing data, variables, and everything else. Honestly, I know this sounds quite quaint, and I guess it's maybe top of mind because of Bill Snyder and Kansas State, but I think there is some value to be found in the JUCO realm right now. I think that is very undervalued at the moment. I think you're going to see teams heavily shopping for JUCO players in the spring because they realize they have holes in their roster and they need to address them. And the only place you can go get that is JUCO. But I think if I was a school, I would be trying to look at the JUCO market in December and get those guys in earlier, as opposed to having a run on them in the spring where you're recruiting with 20 other guys. Because I do think there's a lot of good football players there. And I think a symptom of the current era where so many transfers are taken is there's a lot of high school players that would have 10 years ago been college signees, be it on the FBS or FCS level, that kind of fall into the cracks at JUCO because there just aren't enough spots. So, I mean, we'll see if that happens. Like, I mean, Diego Pavia is probably the last really relevant JUCO player that we've had in a long time, but I do think there are some values to be found on the JUCO level.
Friend of the show, Drew Dallas, head coach at Hutchinson, is clapping right now behind his computer screen, asking us to clip what you just said to send it out to the masses, because I know he feels the same way. Chris, I wanted to ask you kind of something that, again, we hear a lot when Kevin and I are out, but we don't know, like, how many of them actually exist. Is it something that's overblown by coaches? And I'm going to bring up the Montana coach, I think at the coaches convention, was talking about this last week, of the kind of how much of a problem are the unofficial agents, the barbershop representation, so to speak, in terms of steering kids wrong? Or is that, again, something that's maybe an overblown thing from coaches, or something that people thought rumor wise would be a problem and actually just isn't?
I think it's one of the classic yes and no answers. I mean, to be fair, we've always had runners in college football. You know what I mean? There have always been people trying to get a piece. Like, that piece might have been like $5,000 back in the day, and now it's like $50,000 for these guys. But there have always been bad actors in college athletics, but like the scale of it is significantly worse now, and the damage they can do to a young person's financial future and career is larger because of the stakes. So that is a problem, but it's not really more of them out there. And yeah, I mean, like, it's certainly an issue. There are some really, really good agents out there. There are some really, really good agents who don't have NFLPA certification, but I do think it would be beneficial for the sport if there was some sort of certification and education process for agents in college athletics. I think it would be beneficial for the agents in the space, frankly, because it would trim the field down to people who are willing to put in the work to get there. And it would definitely be beneficial to kids, because, I mean, I deal with agents of all shapes and sizes. A lot of them are really great to deal with, but I can tell the difference between a good agent and a bad agent, and I'm not negotiating with them. I can only imagine what that's like on the other end of that.
We've talked a little bit about KU and K-State, and I'd be remiss not to bring up Missouri. With Missouri, you talked about barrier for entry in the Big 12. The SEC has a different kind of barrier for entry, and that, 3 or 4 SEC teams are going to get invited to just about every playoff. And so you don't necessarily need to be an SEC championship game contender to maybe slip inside, especially with those unbalanced schedules. What does Missouri need to do well in the transfer portal on a regular basis for the Tigers to maybe put themselves into that position where they're 4th or they're 5th in the SEC and giving themselves a fighting chance of sneaking into that playoff?
Oh man, if you would have asked me on like October 5th this year, I would have told you Missouri was going to get in the playoff. Geez, really unfortunate injury run for them. But I mean, you have to do what you've done. Like, Missouri's been on the forefront of NIL, like in college athletics. They've done as good of a job as anyone on capitalizing and fundraising and being targeted with what they do. I mean, shoot, the whole state changed their laws to benefit Missouri in terms of like college football and getting players in the building. So I think they've done all they can there. You just have to continue to evaluate, and you have to continue to find deals where you can. Missouri has a really good transfer class, in my opinion. Like, I think Austin Simmons was a very smart get for them. I think that's a high ceiling quarterback that was slightly undervalued, and they took advantage of a weird situation in Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss to go get him. I love Robert Woodyard coming over from Auburn. He was starting linebacker there. Horatio Fields. When you talk about value, he's probably pretty expensive in the portal, but that is somebody with like day 2 NFL upside. If things go right, you obviously have to hit on him. But Missouri got a guy there with like a lot of talent and somebody I really believe in. They took Arizona State starting left tackle, Josh Apkins. Sorry, I'm going down the list. You can go on for a while. But I think Missouri has to continue making high school their base while also filling in the gaps with transfer portal around them. Missouri, I would put in the same kind of bucket as Ole Miss, to be frank, right? Like, you're shooting in the same gap of high school recruiting. You can get a top 20 class every once in a while, but in reality, you're probably going to sit in that 20 to 25 range. So you just have to go hit on your transfer portal targets every year. And if you get the right schedule and you have the right injury luck, Missouri can take advantage.
Chris, I know, you cover things from a national perspective, from a national scope. But again, kind of like Kevin said, we'd be remiss not to talk about Missouri. I would be remiss. I'm sure Kansas State fans are wondering why I haven't asked you yet about Colin Klein and any particular changes or differences that you've kind of heard through the grapevine about maybe how his staff not only attacked this window, but maybe their theories and their stance on portal success in the future.
I mean, they've clearly been very aggressive in the portal. I'm not saying that Chris Kleinman's staff wasn't using the portal and wasn't aggressive with it, but it's a transition class for them, and you could tell they really tried to take advantage of that. They made an interesting GM hire in Trey Scott, obviously coming over from the agency world, former NFL scout. It's not like he's not ready to do that. He's obviously very close to Colin Klein. So it'll be interesting to see long-term how his philosophy on that evolves. Colin Klein hasn't been in charge of roster building before. Trey Scott hasn't been in charge of roster building before until like a month ago.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell. In my opinion, at this point, it's still kind of be a TBD in terms of what that looks like. But I think a fresh approach and a more eager approach to embrace NIL and everything that comes with it is certainly the reality of the change from Chris Kleinman, who was a great coach, but I think would openly tell people he was a little tired of this era of college athletics, and bring a new voice in there. He's going to be more aggressive in Colin Klein in terms of fundraising and using that element of the sport. I think it's going to be healthy for Kansas State in the long term. What that looks like in terms of roster construction philosophically, I'm not sure, but I do know Kansas State is going to be a little more with the times from a NIL standpoint, which is a huge positive.
Chris, for those people watching and listening, how can they follow along with your reporting and read your writing?
Well, hopefully, not too much writing the next couple of weeks. Hopefully get a break, but it's Twitter's Chris_Hummer, and check us out at 24/7 Sports and CBS. And obviously y'all know this, but we have a great Kansas and Kansas State side at 24/7. I encourage everybody to read that as well.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Chris, for stopping by. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening to the Verbal Commitment Podcast here on KCSN. If you enjoyed what you saw or heard, leave us a comment or review, like this video, subscribe here on YouTube, or hit us with a 5-star rating if you're listening on an audio platform. And until next time, we'll see you on the trail, and take care.